Hey everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Teri Hunter. I'm an intuitive astrologer, and what I want to talk about in this video is the babies that were born in August of 2025. While I'm an intuitive astrologer, this video series is not focused in on the sun sign, but rather the month the baby was born. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to pull up the chart and I'm going to talk about how the outer planets have changed and how that will affect the children that have been born in the 2020s, specifically 2024, 2025, and 2026, as the planets came together in conversations that they haven't done in hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And this changes the landscape of the Earth plane, the Earth structure, and these children are going to grow up in that transition. So my intention for these videos is to help you as parents, guardians, teachers, grandparents, aunts, and uncles to have a little bit of information, because you're going to be parenting children in a world that has never existed in recent memory. So you have new opportunities, and you'll find new obstacles as these children display powers and wisdom that you will find astonishing for their young years on this earth. So let's pull up the chart. Well, first, before I do that, let me go through and tell you a little bit about the planets, especially if you're unfamiliar with astrology. I'm going to start with the outer planets, as what the outer planets are called are generational planets. Uranus takes about 8 years to move through each sign. Neptune takes 14 years about to move through each sign, and Pluto can take 15 to 20 years to move through each sign. This sets a tone, it sets a dynamic up. And during these years, 2024, 2025, and 2026, these outer planets are in harmonious aspects to one another. But at the same time, they are very powerful in their influence in dismantling structures that have been out of balance, or structures that no longer support a future version of humanity. The inner planets are known as personal planets. The sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. They, in the astrology chart, can represent many things, but for the most part, they represent, well, for the purposes of this video, character traits. So the sun represents the I am, how I identify myself. This video will cover the Leo energy and the Virgo energy. So that will be the sun sign. The moon moves so quickly, you'd have to look at your individual child's chart and know their time of birth in order to determine where that is. But the moon is going to represent how they emote, how they feel, which I think is the most important and influential aspect to how they move forward in this lifetime. Mercury represents how they communicate and how they think and how they learn. Venus represents how they belong and how they partner. She also represents, in a material sense, money and skills. Mars represents how I take action. It can also represent the more challenging sides of anger and frustration and impatience. We see what we call the semi-personal planets, which are Jupiter and Saturn. They represent aspects of the personality as well as the dynamics with which, or the environment with which, the children were born. So that's important. Jupiter represents expansion. It represents entrepreneurship. It represents religion and philosophy and diversity, just on a kind of keyword basis. And Saturn represents the rules, the regulations, the obligations, and the responsibilities. And that is in its most challenging dynamic. Saturn between 2024 and 2026 was in Pisces before it moved into Aries. And this is quite significant. We'll touch on that a little later in this video. The nodes of the moon are considered the karmic points in the natal chart, which really reflect the south node represents a point where the soul is familiar. It is old habits. You could call it a default of some kind. During this period of time, the nodes 2025 and part of 2026, the south node is in Virgo, which is again about the erosion of old systems of thinking, of our daily activities. The Virgo energy also rules our health. It rules worry. It rules the runaround of every day. It's what you do when you hit the ground running, and it is also the service you provide to others in your work environment. So with the South Node going through Virgo, it's going to erode anything there where there is a structure attached to something that's no longer practical, realistic, or feasible for the future. There's also in the Virgo energy a perfectionism, and the South Node there is intending to erode any attempts at being perfect or at being overly critical of the self. And the house would indicate what the focus was of that. The North Node is what we're stretching for. It is a point that the soul has yet to experience and very much is ravenous for that experience. In Pisces, it is really representing being more connected to the soul's voice within and using creativity and imagination to display that. So this is how these children are born on this karmic axis, to erode systems, analyzing processes, anything that's too practical and dependable. Virgo tends to believe what it can see with its eyes, whereas Pisces tends to believe what it can feel with its heart and its compassion and its empathy. So this is part of the experience that these children will have a karmic attachment to. We also see a karmic point in the asteroid Chiron. Chiron represents a chronic wound that we come into this planet with. Often it's not fitting in or feeling abandoned in some way. Chiron, through the challenges that Chiron experienced, Chiron being the centaur, half beast, half horse, and half human, being a semi-god because he's the son of Saturn, but both Saturn and his mother, I don't need to give you a lesson there with mythology, but rejected him at birth. Hercules nurtured him and taught him the ways of war, he learned about herbology. So Chiron represents a chronic wound that cannot be actually healed, but it can be balanced. And through that balance, there is wisdom extracted, and therefore there is a gift. And this is in the sign of Aries for the children born in 2025, which will be a wound of the self and how they identify with themselves and how they move forward in the world. So I think this is very significant because this is part of a cleanup. By the time we get to 2026, the nodes will move into the Leo Aquarius axis mid-year, and Chiron will move into Taurus. Which is going to set up a whole new dynamic for the 2026 children. So in 2025, what I'm seeing are architects, children being born with visions of the future that we cannot imagine in an old structure. And as the guardians of these children, your flexibility and your willingness to be open to new ideas and new concepts and new technologies and new talents that these children display at very young ages, you'll be most would be the path of least resistance. Let's pull up the chart. Okay. And let's look at what's going on. Where is oh, I need my share button. Sorry. Forgot where I was. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to pop through the chart intermittently. When it comes to your child's personal chart, you need the location and the time of birth, and that will give you an idea of what is the intention for your child's life here on Earth and what their traits and their predispositions will be in their character. The moon moves extremely quickly, so we won't address the moon much, but I will touch on aspects of the other planets. The house structure may not be the same because we have what we call the rising sign, and that changes with the time as well. So this is general, and yet there will be common themes that go on. So here we start the month, which I think is extremely powerful, with the first conjunction of Neptune and Saturn in Aries in retrograde, no less, at 1 degree. Now, the world axis is at 0 degrees of Aries, which is literally the inception of the physical experience, the soul coming in. These two planets have not come together at this point in thousands of years. Neptune is entering Aries for the first time since about 1861, the United States Civil War. And while Saturn moves much more quickly around the zodiac, these two have not come together at this point in, again, thousands of years. So Saturn represents the old. It represents history. It represents authority and obligation and responsibility and duty. Neptune represents the divine, spirituality. It represents artistic endeavors like music and poetry and dance and imagination and filmmaking and the things that are idealistic and dreamy in the world. Now, they also represent erosion, a sense of understanding that the human vessel that is known as the physical body is simply a tool for the soul to experience something. And with them being born with this configuration, and again, depending upon the house, it will give it more nuance, more detail, but there will be an erosion of the old self, the old way of identifying the self, the old ways of taking action. Neptune will compel Saturn to build or I should say Saturn will compel Neptune to build structures of the self that are based on the soul's voice within, that may seem crazy, honestly, to the old structures. Notably, the idea that when I put focus on something, I start to draw the components of it through the universal law of attraction. So here we see this is a very strong aspect. And again, this is the first time it has actually come in an exact conversation where the two planets are fused together, compelling and almost demanding that we endure the erosion of the old self and build the new self in a way that is out of this world and magical, and is almost here where Saturn depicts the golden age of man. Saturn again is a god. Now we see that there is what they call a sextile to the outer planet Uranus, which is one of awakening. It's visions of the future, it's innovation, it's technology, and it's just entered Gemini for the first time in 84 years. Then it's also making a sextile to Pluto here, retrograde in Aquarius. Sextiles are aspects that are favorable and harmonious, but they require consciousness and activation. So we have to participate in an awakening, in a willingness to be rebellious within our mind, within our speech, and within how we interact in our everyday lives, and also be willing to look at a deep psychology that has held us and tethered us to feeling abandoned, outside the box, less than, and also where there is power and control over us. And I think this is further evidenced in this beginning part of August, is that we have a square. This is a tense aspect to Venus here in Cancer. And this is exact 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree. Venus and Neptune are normally best friends, but here there's a tense conversation because Venus could be very married to the beliefs and traditions of the past, of the roots with which she is raised. And the idea of abandoning them or of not being responsible to them could create tension. There's also the idea of very much Aries is a sign of the self, the individual, whereas the sign of Cancer is about the group, the tribe, the family. So there could be tensions within your children about, where their loyalties lie. And when you allow them the wings to expand and to fly, they then can come home and roost in a way that is more comfortable and safe for them. Venus is very favorable in the sign of Cancer. I'm going to click off of Saturn now. We also see that Mercury is retrograde at the beginning of August. When Mercury is retrograde in a chart, it indicates a time of reviewing my thoughts, my speech, what I'm learning, and how is it aligned to now, because of Saturn and Neptune's um, conjunction, it is very much aligned to how do I think and rewrite and create and express myself? How do I stand on the stage of my authenticity? And this is in a loose trine, but a trine nonetheless to these planets. So we're seeing a harmonious aspect here to these planets. And as I'm willing to endure the journey of awareness of my soul being more invested in its expression than I am in the audience of the human structure, the more powerful I will really be in my own co-creation, my own experience, the happier my life could potentially be. We also see at this time, until about the 10th, we're going to see a conjunction between Mercury and the Sun. And when that happens, we're looking at somebody who is very much attached to Mercury rules not more than just communications. It rules my teammates, my workmates. It rules interacting with others on some level in a cooperative endeavor. You journalists work together, teachers work together. So you could see that the children born in early August are very invested in community, in bringing forth information, in you could even see comedians here, really, believe it or not. Anyway, so again, it really is going to depend on the house and what else is going on in your child's chart. We have Jupiter here. Jupiter is what they call exalted in Cancer. This is very favorable to have both Venus and Jupiter in your child's natal chart, because there'll be a lot of friends, there'll be a lot of warmth and a lot of love. Jupiter is what they call exalted. So it's in a house that it is celebrated in, and it brings much bounty and wealth. They call it the hometown hero. So I think that this is pretty favorable for a child's natal chart. Let's move over to the 4th, where we see a little bit of a challenge here. Mars is in the last degrees of Virgo. So if your child is born in the first week of August, having Mars in Virgo will make potentially someone who's very sharp, very quick with their words, very quick with they could walk very quickly. They could be very fast paced. But Mars is in this interesting dynamic because it's called an anaretic degree, where it's anxious to move out of the house it's in, and it's really looking into the next house and wanting to experience something new. When we look at Mars in Virgo, we're looking at taking actions very strongly in the service of others. We're looking at the actions and how I wish I could find another synonym for the word actions, how I behave, how I express my anger, how I express my heroism. Here, there's an anxiousness to be of service to another, and yet to still have a sense of self, because Mars is all about the self, and it's in an opposition and going into an opposition to its home, where we see Saturn and Neptune. So this is considered a challenging dynamic. So there could be here where the child is compelled to be of service to others, to devote their life to health, to mental health, to processes and analyzing and discerning systems that are created towards the future. But it also could be in a dynamic that is feeling like the self is not as important. I sort of feel like they're Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. We also see that Mars is in what they call a quincunx. This is a blind spot to Chiron. We talked about Chiron earlier, that chronic wound of self, that chronic wound of not feeling that the self is celebrated or the self is seen. And sometimes with Mars in Virgo, there can be a lot of criticism, like that this person could war with words and with almost even sometimes without words, but with the thoughts of like they could be a little sharp in their thoughts. They could be a little critical or a little bit, it could be a little challenging. That's all I want to say. We also see that there is a favorable aspect to Pluto. So I would suspect that as with a parent guiding a child with it that has Mars in Virgo to be more accepting of the flaws of the human process, the not worrying so much about how we're going to get there. Will we get there? There's a huge part of Virgo that worries and frets and over analyzes. So as that's balanced out, then your child literally has a really a great opportunity to be of service in that regard in their future. We see a nice trine here to Uranus. Again, Uranus is in a house of thought and it represents genius in the future. So as the mind is used to be brave and to cut through the muck and to be willing to use the past not as an anchor, but as a reference point for moving forward. So we take systems that work and then we expand upon them, then we'll have more opportunities. The little bit of the challenge with the earth signs is once they learn how to do something one way, there's a little bit of a challenge in shifting that without a big experience that shows them that the future is stable and secure. Mars will move into Libra on the 7th, and it will stay in Libra for about 2 months. Now, Mars is not considered in favor in Libra. It's considered in the detriment, which is the furthest place from its home. But these children that come in with Mars at the early degrees of Libra are experiencing their action point, the hero within them, the bravery within them on what's called the supergalactic center, where they are learning in this lifetime to take action slowly, methodically, and through their soul's voice within, that they are source energy and that they can manifest anything they want, any experience they want. That's part of Pluto's transit through Aquarius for the next 20 years, as these children are literally going through all their pubescence and early, becoming early adults. They are going to experience a series of revelations and waves of intuitions and knowing of where people are manipulating or using old systems or fear or somehow playing to a game of scarcity in order to motivate, and they will not respond to it. We also see that while Mercury is retrograde in Leo, it's making a favorable aspect to Mars. So if we're trying to repress these children in some way, if we're trying to put them if society is trying to put them in a box, they will not go easily. They will be much more intuitively aware, and I want to offer this because the reason Mars is not considered, not just that it's furthest away from its home, because it's also co-ruler of Scorpio. So it's not really far from one of its home bases. But what Mars has to do here is be diplomatic. Mars has to be a warrior for peace. Figure that one out. And when it realizes that it is the source of many of its challenges, and those challenges are designed so that it can choose peace, it can choose harmony, it can choose balance, then we'll start to see these children blossom and just really expand. And that is supported by Uranus and Pluto. The environment will help them to do that. Okay. On the 12th. And I want to comment right now because also around this time, from now through this next week, Venus conjunct Jupiter is extremely favorable in your child's natal chart. This is money, hometown hero, um, really feeling valued, really feeling a sense of connection and belonging. And there's a lot of grace in this energy. There's a lot of acceptance for a bigger picture of what home might mean. Like we're all on one planet. We may choose different locations, we may choose different colors of skin, we may choose different beliefs, but on some level, we're all one. And again, this would be, we could flesh out what the detail is of what your child is contracted within the Cancer energy, because this also rules the mother as well. And because I'm not really addressing the moon, because the moon also represents the mother, I think that would be foolhardy, but wouldn't really apply to the masses. But here, this is just anywhere you're born, anywhere in the world with this conjunction, and it's yummy. Yummy. Okay, let's go to the 12th where we have a little bit of action going on. Here we see Mars exact on, well, actually, it must be earlier in the day. The supergalactic center is at 2 degrees, 22 minutes of Libra. So we've got Mars anywhere within a few, Mars, there's quite a wide conjunction actually here at 5 to 12 degrees, but the closer it is to the exact degree, the more powerful it is in the child's chart. So this really is going to be one of the biggest challenges for the people born at this time, the Leos born at this time, to really recognize that they are literally the root ball of all the experiences that they have on the planet. And if those experiences are challenging or erosive or feel repressed, it's because they have chosen to break through that repression, to break through that structure that limits them. And because the Leo energy is ruled by the sun, and the sun is exalted in the Aries energy, there is a really strong re-identification with the self. I believe that these children are the architects of new thought, and that they will inherit an earth that was dense and where you had to effort, and they will not have to effort as much, because when they focus their thoughts and then connect their emotions to those thoughts, identify if they're based on faith and joy and excitement, or if they're based on fear and repression and limitation, and then they are co-creating that experience, their minds are going to go psh, and some of them will just expand beyond our believability at the time, because they truly are magical. They really are. And the more we nurture that as they are little ones, the easier it'll be for the grown-ups in their lives. Again, we see a really tight, favorable aspect between Pluto, landscape of the psychology of our minds, where we feel power and control out of balance. We see this in a favorable aspect to Saturn, which represents the history and structure of mankind. We're looking at Neptune, that really represents a dreamy, creative, magical potential of what we can be. And then Uranus here, really wanting to break up that old, small thoughts that interrupt us from our greatness. Again, Uranus is the great awakener. And we see here by the 12th that Mercury has gone direct. Now, the thing that's interesting about this particular time is that Mercury, or any planet, once it's retrograding, as it's starting the retrograde, it slows down. And it's something where they say it stations. So it appears to stop in the sky before it changes direction. Here, we see it at 4 degrees of Leo. And this would be where, for quite a few days, Mercury is sitting in the sky at this degree, where it is 5 times more powerful than it has been in motion. So I think that's important to know, because it's making favorable aspects here to Saturn and Neptune. I think one of the things about the Leo children is that as a guide and a parent, you want to keep them excited and curious and not let them get too stuck in a certain way of being, because the fixed signs, and Leo is one that's extremely sensitive to how the audience responds to them. And it's not about applauding everything that they do and kind of blowing smoke up their little skirts, but rather just letting them understand that every time they stumble or fall, they learn something more about their authenticity and how to be courageous and come from their heart, which makes them more palatable to the audience that they would like to engage. Saturn is going to hit 0 degrees of on the 18th of Aries. And this is significant. If your child is born during the period of time when Saturn is at 0 degrees, this is a time when your child is literally reviewing the history of how it has protected itself and implemented healthy boundaries for the creation of its own identity. Now, I know we're talking about babies. I mean, we're actually right now it is May 2026. I'm talking about August 2025. But these babies are really much more mature and much more wise and seasoned than one would suspect because of their physical appearance. And I think that's important because Venus and Jupiter are here in the homeland, creating the beliefs and the self-worth that these children will have. This is a favorable dynamic to the North Node and to the South Node as we nurture them to be open-minded and curious. Then we take away the need for perfectionism and we bring them even closer into the feelings of the soul speaking through the physical to manifest a dreamy experience on the earth. Okay, let me turn over my notes real quick. All right, let me click off of Venus real quick. Let's go to the 25th. Now we are in the Virgo energy. So now the sun is completely in a whole different vibration. We see that Venus is at 0 degrees of Leo. Now, on this day, any planet in your child's chart that is 0 degrees, there is something absolutely new and unfamiliar that they are learning, and there is a sense of having to protect that, to not allow toxicity to permeate the cell of that creation. So here, I think this would be about literally their creativity, how their self-expression, and maybe even how they interact with romance and the idea of romance. And we see an exact trine to Saturn. So part of what they will experience is a maturity over time, whereas they become more and more aware of themselves, more and more aware and accepting of their individuality, more and more willing to be authentic in their expression instead of trying to figure out what the audience wants and then deliver that. I think they'll find great bounty because we don't often think of Saturn as a money planet, but it is. It co-rules Aquarius, which brings wealth over time, willing to endure the journey of the illusion of not being valuable and popping up on the other side. We also see that, hold on. We are going to have until the end of the month, we're going to see the nodes, where are my nodes? Making aspects to Jupiter. Let me click on Jupiter. This is actually very favorable. The thing I didn't mention, I don't think about Jupiter, is it rules religion, and therefore it rules a connection to the angelic realm and the ability to tap into the divine. And this is sextiling the South Node, which is an activation. I have to practice my spirituality, my connection to the divine, believing in my expansion, believing in the idea that I have the ability through my own entrepreneurial ideas, or potentially even the joy of education, because Jupiter also rules higher education, to expand myself. And that's further evidenced by the harmonious aspect of a trine coming here to the North Node. So I feel like this is a great time for this particular soul has given themselves some almost like a leg up, like having the deck is more stacked in their favor than it isn't, because I think that there's a little aspect for me that reads on a delay here, as if these children maybe in childhood will have more challenges socially because they're going to want to be accepted by others, they're going to want to be part of the group, but as they age and as they get older, they will feel that their uniqueness actually brings them closer to the group. And again, we see this favorable aspect between Neptune and Uranus and Pluto, all at 1 degree. So here, what we're looking at is as we review with this in a birth chart in retrograde, these planets are offering on a soul level throughout this lifetime an opportunity to understand that anything that has influenced me in a potentially toxic way, like maybe the environment says you can't, you're not tall enough, or you're not pretty enough, or you're not skinny enough, or you're not mature enough. That's gonna erode away. That's gonna be connecting to the soul's voice, not necessarily listening to the outside world that says, I can't be who I want to be in your time frame or in what your expectation is. I can't help but thinking, in 2026, and we see all sorts of children accomplishing things on cooking shows and on other platforms where they have opportunities to exercise their talents and their skills in a time frame, being 8, 9, 10, 11, where in previous generations, none of those children had those opportunities. These children will have those opportunities tenfold. So let me stop sharing the chart. So overall, as I said, my intention for this is for you to understand the dynamics with which these children are being born. I feel like during their early years, your influence over them and the opportunities you give them that says it's okay to stumble, it's okay to be unsure. The whole deal is you just got to keep coming from your heart, trusting that processes will change, opportunities will shift, technology will do a lot to open up the space for them. And I mean literally the space, because there may be jobs out in the universe. Who knows? I mean, I say that sort of tongue in cheek right now, but I don't think that's necessarily wrong. So if you're watching this in, let's say it's 2026 now, and you're watching this in 2032, your kid may be 16 and working at a McDonald's that's up in the sky. I don't know. All right, everybody, that's it for me. I hope you found this helpful. If you'd like me to look at your chart or your child's chart, I am available. My information is below in the description. Actually, to get a hold of me is all the way at the bottom. So be sure to go down there. Please like, subscribe, and share this with anyone who will be influential in your child's life, and getting to know them on a level of their soul versus their personality. All right, everybody, take care. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.